Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Mia Tuan, and as Dean of UW's College of Education, I am so delighted to welcome you to tonight's event. I have a group of 8 very nervous but very excited people waiting to tell you important stories that matter to their hearts. And we have some requests to ask of you, but I'll actually hold off on that until I do a few other things. Let's turn now to a land acknowledgement. So we are on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And we honor with gratitude both the land and our ongoing commitments to its people. As an immigrant to this country, I've been on my own journey to understand the rich history of the Native people who have been here since time immemorial, as well as the violence that has been brought upon them by settlers. And as Dean, I have been very thankful for the college's Indigenous Education Advisory Board that serves as an advisor to me and to other leadership in the college to ensure that the programs that we pursue and the initiatives that we launch are responsive to and tend to the justness and the thriving of Native people. All right, so welcome to EduTalks. My job today is to set the scene for you and to share that about 8 years ago, we launched something called EduTalks. And the inspiration for it was TED Talks. I had just stepped in as dean, and I had the luxury of meeting with my faculty for the first time, and I was struck by how many stories, the deep, personal, passionate stories that every single person had about why they do the work that they do. And so this idea of we've got to find some way to show off these stories and to do it in a way that maybe is not academic in the sense of an academic talk, but that is more conversational and shorter. So thus was born this idea of, well, what if we had our own purple rug as opposed to a red rug, and that we asked faculty to come, or faculty as well as partners, to come and talk for 5 minutes. That's the goal, a 5-minute talk with one slide as the backdrop to set the story for their talk, okay? So that's the challenge that we asked our 8 presenters to accomplish tonight. They're nervous, so they might not hit it exactly right, but the goal is 5 minutes and then that one slide. The theme, tonight's theme, if I could go back to that, is thriving generations, okay? Which it's not lost on any of us that at this particular historic moment in time, it's an absolutely aspirational thing to be striving for. We are not thriving at this moment as a country or as a nation or as a world, okay? But as educators, as community activists, as dreamers, it's our job to try to hold on to this vision of hope about what could possibly be. And so that's what you're going to hear tonight. 8 people talking about the things that give them hope about a thriving future and thriving generations, okay? So I've got 3 requests, as I was saying before. The first is please be kind. These are not professional storytellers. They're storytellers maybe in their classrooms or in their activism or in their community work, but standing in front of you all with house lights, it's a little intimidating. So please be kind to them as they come out here and just wish them well, okay? The second request is that you hold your applause until the end of each presenter, okay? Otherwise, you'll be doing a lot of clapping because 5 minutes goes fast, okay? And then the third and easy request, if you could go to the next slide, is to join us for the reception afterwards. This is all going to be done in like 45 minutes, okay? And in fact, this is just to set the scene for what happens across the street, which is food, mingling, and the best gift that you can give our presenters is to go up to them and say, oh my God, I loved your talk. What you said about your daughter, oh my God, right? That's how they know they've touched you and that what they've said has reached you, has mattered to you, okay? So the request is to think about, as you hear everybody's talks, which ones really resonate, which ones are sticky, and that those are the ones that during the reception you go up to and say, I loved your talk, and I'd love to hear more, okay? So without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and get the show started with our first speaker, okay? Thank you for joining us.
I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. This would be a gospel song turned anthem, an anthem for everyday people. Sly Stone called everyday people who marched. Multi-generation, multi-ethnic groups of folks who marched. There were elders marching with college students, marching alongside of middle school students, marching alongside of youth, young people. A thriving and inspired generation of people who marched on my behalf, on our behalf. They marched in part so that I could sit at a lunch counter with you, and you might have an encounter there, and perhaps a conversation. How was your lunch today? Oh, it was good. I recommend the soup. Hey, didn't I see you with your mother the other day? How's she doing? She was walking to the cane. Is she okay? Yes, she's fine. Thanks for asking. I'll see you later. They marched so that I might sit and have a chance encounter with you on a bus. Is that seat taken? Oh, it's not? Okay, I'll sit here. Hey, so how was work today? A lot of meetings. Long day. Hey, you going to the picnic this weekend? A whole lot of people. There'll be a barbecue. You're going to go to that? Yeah, I'll be there. Okay, so bring the kids. It'll be fun. Okay, I'll see you later. I'll see you. They marched with the vision of a beloved community, with some chance encounters, with the vision of that which is a beloved community. They marched so that I could participate, thriving generations, so that I could participate, so I could cast a ballot. Now, in the event that you cannot visualize me and fully see me, I am like Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone. I might even be said to possess a mind, he says, but I am of dark skin. I am of African descent. I mention all of that because I woke up a few weeks ago one morning, and I went to my mailbox, and there were some ads in there, and there were some bills in there, and I pulled out a ballot. I pulled a ballot out of my mailbox. It came to me. I did not have to spend my formative years in a prison for political activity the way my brothers and sisters in South Africa did. I did not spend a day in prison. They had their own anthems. They sang Shosholoza, and they marched together. And ultimately, their victory song, Nososikelele Africa, their anthem. I did not have to spend time in a prison. I did not have to stand in line for hours and hours. My ballot came to me, I filled it out, and I turned it in. There was no sacrifice there. I did not have to march 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery, only to get to the foot of the Edmunds Pettus Bridge and have officers stand, hand up, hand on pistol, tear gas, billy clubs. I did not suffer blows. Amelia Boynton was carried away unconscious. I did not suffer blows. John Lewis did, carried away only to return to the bridge again and march. I stand before you alive and well. Jimmy Lee Jackson, at 26 years of age, marching peacefully with his mother, was shot and killed for his activities. Peaceful marching. He was a deacon in his church. He was 26 years old. He sacrificed his life so that I could get a ballot in the mail. He died protecting his mother from violence. He was shot and killed. My ballot came to me. I got up and I got my ballot. I didn't have to sacrifice my high school years. Charles Malden, who's standing just behind John Lewis, was a teenager, 17 years old, and was called to march. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Bernard Lafayette, others inspired him to leave school and march on my behalf so I can have a ballot in the mail and perhaps have a lunch with you at a chance encounter. I didn't have to pass the literacy test. Tell me, How many beans are in that jar? Do you know? Can you guess? Well, if you don't know that, how many bubbles in a bar of soap? What would you guess? Oh, you don't know? Perhaps you'll know this. How many seeds in a watermelon? It's a literacy test. I didn't have to pass a literacy test. My ballot came to me and I filled it out. No poll tax for me. My ballot came to me. I think James Baldwin was right when he said, and I paraphrase, American history is larger, longer, more vast, at times more terrible, and yet more beautiful than anything anyone has ever said about it. It can be all of those things, and we can hold the complexity of all of that. It is at once at times terrible, and it is ultimately beautiful in light of this vision of a beloved community. I don't know what more I can do and what perhaps I should do to honor those of a thriving generation who sacrificed and came before me. But I think the least I can do is talk about them, tell stories about them, maybe teach about them. Just a month ago, the 59th anniversary of Bloody Sunday was recognized, and many of us came back to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and we walked across that bridge. And someone during a rally, a woman stood up and said, "You people who marched, you young people, you freedom fighters, you who marched, you are patriots. You are patriots because you marched because of your love of country, because of your love of country." I don't know what more I can do to honor those who have sacrificed, but the least I can do is tell stories. The least I can do is teach about them. And the least I can do, if given a moment, find one or two of those foot soldiers, place my arm gently around them and say that we love you. And we are so grateful that you kept your mind stayed on freedom.
Hello. I am the proud daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter of Black women who have been nothing short of collaborative educational leaders in their families and communities. Today, I want to start by sharing a story from my own family about Mary Elvini McGowan, my maternal great-grandmother. You'll see her pictured there. And her involvement in a women's ministry at Jacob's Memorial Church of God in Christ in Nacogdoches, which is located in East Texas. Through Mary Elvini's involvement in this women's ministry, she, a domestic worker, would travel from Nacogdoches to places like Detroit and Chicago for women's conferences. At one of these conferences, she met a woman that insisted that she send my grandmother, Mary Ruth McGowan, to college. So my granny, my grandmother, Mary Ruth, she has shared stories about growing up in Nacogdoches and not being able to move around the town without one of her older brothers due to the threat of gendered racism. However, she would go on and enroll in and graduate from Prairie View A&M, a historically Black university in Texas. She would go on to become an elementary educator. After finishing college, my grandmother later moved to Houston, Texas with my grandfather. My grandfather, after serving in the US military, was working as a line order cook in the city. My grandmother pleaded and talked with him and eventually convinced him to re-enroll at Prairie View, where she had met him. And he would also study education and go on and become an assistant principal in Houston Independent School District. To this day, my grandma and late grandfather are my most formative examples of educational and community leaders enacting a deep commitment to students and families throughout the course of their lives. My grandmother, who will soon turn 96, still welcomes former students into her home, talking with them, giving them advice, laughing, and they also stop by to check in on her. So coming full circle, When I think about Mary Elvini's involvement in this communal women's space functioning under the constraints of Jim Crow segregation, I'm most captivated by how her involvement there continues to reverberate today. Her involvement in and beyond Nacogdoches, Texas, affecting my grandmother's, my grandfather's, and subsequent generations' lives. So when I think about that space, I'm captivated by just the importance of place, right? So in my research and work, I think about how place matters to Black families' educational agency and leadership. By place, I certainly mean, yes, our physical location, but I'm also talking about the histories, the power dynamics, and most important, the relationships that make geographic location consequential to families and communities' well-being. And when I talk about Black families' leadership and agency, I don't just want to talk about it historically. In today's urban landscapes, Black families are encountering challenges ranging from the rising cost of living, gentrification, and school closures. In our own region, we have seen many Black families displaced from communities and neighborhoods to surrounding suburbs and school systems. So in previous research I've done in the Detroit metropolitan region, the families that sat and talked with me were also held transformative perspectives of educational and communal resources in and across places. They graciously shared stories from their own family and community backgrounds, and they told me how those experiences informed their desires for a more equitable distribution of resources across the region, and in some cases, empowered their partnership and advocacy with other Black families and Black educators to create a place that better met their children's need and met their well-being, right? So, Black families hold transformative perspectives that are vital to our ability to create more just schools in communities and places. When I think about Mary Elvini and that women's ministry, I'm reminded that we have so much knowledge and strategy that comes from our ancestors, that comes from our families, and that comes from collectives that we must apply to make a more just place. Thank you.
I'm a walking counter-narrative. Recently, I went to get my hair cut at a new salon near my house. And as I'm getting my hair cut, the Asian stylist asks me, "What do you do?" And I say, "I teach at the University of Washington." And she laughs. And then she goes on to explain that when she thinks about professors, the image that comes to mind is of an old white man. Every quarter, I have at least one student that says, "I've never had an Asian teacher before." Each of these moments is an opportunity to redefine who a teacher is and what a teacher does. I'm a teaching professor, and my contribution to the field of early childhood education is to inspire current and future educators to be advocates and change makers who question, challenge, and disrupt our currently inequitable systems. Growing up in Orange County in the 1980s, I was one of very few Asian children at my elementary school. And it happened frequently on the playground that my peers would pull up the corner of their eyes to mimic my almond-shaped eyes. And I was embarrassed, humiliated, and I endured. 25 years later, my son started first grade in the Bay Area, and as I was walking him to line up outside of his classroom, I see a child pulling up the corner of his eyes and laughing with the peer next to him. I was shocked that these same racist taunts were circulating still. And now as an adult, I spoke up. I talked with the teacher and the principal, and they led discussions school-wide. Just because something's persistent doesn't mean it has to be that way. So every quarter, I invite students to challenge what they thought they knew about educational systems. I want them to feel how school can be radically different than what they have experienced, and that together, we can imagine new ways of learning that go beyond compliance to rules, tests, and exams. I want them to feel how school can be so different. I believe they need to feel it to enact it. And so we breathe and we meditate together. Students share acknowledgments about what is important to them. I shift the power of assessment to students to determine their final grades through ungrading, and I tell them my stories. So one day I was at home with my 3 kids who were all under the age of 6 at the time, and I was cooking dinner, and my middle son, who is 3, starts jumping on the couch. Well, he gets 1 or 2 jumps in before he falls headfirst into the wooden coffee table and gets this big gash right between his eyes. And I'm panicking on the inside, and I call 911, and the paramedics arrive, and they calmly take him to the hospital. In the ER, the nurse takes a look at his face and says, "The doctor will be in shortly to stitch it up." I ask for the plastic surgeon. The nurse takes a look at me and says, "You don't need a plastic surgeon. If he were a girl, I'd get the plastic surgeon, but he's a boy, so you don't need one." I ask again. I insist. People make all sorts of judgments about what we need or what we deserve, and we have the power to refute those assumptions, demand what we deserve, and refuse to take no for an answer. I teach because I believe teaching is a powerful form of advocacy. Every conversation is the opportunity to reframe a person's thinking. And I know that what may not be possible for me when a system is too big for me to change, I can do the work of pouring into students, inviting them in so that the next generation can dream and design new ways of learning and being. It is hard to be a counter-narrative. It's painful, it's exhausting, and in moments of despair, when situations feel so unfair, like when repeated microaggressions wear me down, when my voice is erased or unacknowledged, or when it feels like I will never be enough in institutions that deny my humanity, I want to retreat and cry, which sometimes I do, and then I tell myself, there is so much more education to do because I want all children to walk free in this world. And so I set up meeting after meeting, and I show up over and over, relaying the same messages in 20 different ways. I believe education is a powerful lever for social change, and by embracing teaching in my professional and personal life, I spread hundreds of thousands of seeds of ideas that grow in the minds and actions of others. At a conference, a colleague and I spent 3 hours leading discussions about disrupting whiteness in early care settings. And at the end of our time together, a woman of color stood up with tears in her eyes, and she expressed deep gratitude to our predecessors for the opportunity to learn from us, 2 women of color that day. It was a touching reminder that we don't often get the opportunity to learn from folks who look like us. And as isolating as it can be, we are never alone in this work. It is a privilege to teach, and as teachers, we should be responsible ancestors, like the many folks of color who came before us and fought to belong in the spaces that were not made for them. Let us live and teach with purpose and intention toward a vision of a socially just world for our collective children. Tell your stories that resist the dominant narratives. Reinvent stories that inspire dreams of justice, and create new stories where we belong. I'm hopeful that in the future, when folks who look like me go get their haircut or go grocery shopping, and they say they're a teacher or a professor, that it won't be surprising. They won't need to be a counter-narrative because the narrative will have changed. I invite you to join me in making that our reality.
She's so smart, but she's so shy. That's what Mrs. Dawns told me in an email when she described Sarai, a new 5th grade student in her building who had just moved from Edo State, Nigeria to Central Texas. I developed a relationship with Mrs. Dawns the year before through a university and literacy partnership at her elementary school. And she had done a number of things to get Sarai to open up and to become more social. For instance, she invited the author of the Black Panther to speak at their school, and she strategically sat Sarai in the front row so that she could connect with aspects of African culture. And she planned a family night so that many families like Sarai could be in the school building and connect around their stories of immigration. And then finally, she reached out to me, a first-generation Nigerian and African-American woman, to hopefully mentor her and get her to open up a little bit more. I agreed. Over the next few months, Sarai and I met every Friday in her library during her lunch hour. And our mentor and mentee experience was anchored in a text by Maria Budos, "Tell Us We're Home." It's a beautiful story that tells the narrative of 3 girls who immigrated from Mexico, Trinidad and Tobago, and Slovakia to New Jersey. And as Sarai and I dive deeper into the text, sharing the similarities between their experiences and hers, we also delve deeper into our experience and our relationship. So much that on the last day, Sarai came into the library, not just with her book, not just with her lunch, but with a slice of pizza for me. It was indicative of the bond that we had developed over that short amount of time. And I was gracious and filled with so much gratitude for it. So I reached out to her parents and asked if I could keep in touch. The next week, I met with her parents at a coffee shop. And her mother, Mrs. Imasuen, and I, we sat across the table from each other. And I asked her, "So, Mrs. Imasuen, has Sarai always been this shy?" And she looked at me and she let out a laughter from the depth of her belly. And she said, "Ha, ha, ha. Sarai, shy? She's far from shy." In fact, she told me that all 4 of her children had become less talkative, less social, ever since they moved from Nigeria to the United States. She said it was because they realized how their Nigerian English sounded so different from their classmates' American US English. And while Nigeria is home to over 500 languages, English is its official language because of the British colonization that ended in 1960. So the differences in their Englishes is what caused her children to be more silent. Still, Mrs. Imasuen encouraged her children that with time, they would become more used to the different speaking styles in the school building. My conversation with Mrs. Imasuen drew my attention to a larger issue: how schools are filled with narrow and harmful beliefs that silence not just African youth's languages, but also their identities. It's an experience that I was so familiar with as a young girl growing up in Detroit, Michigan, and New York City. It was also the experiences of many of my West African students in Harlem, New York. Proudly African outside of school, on social media, at home, quietly African, and in many cases, invisibly African at school. I was so intrigued by all the similarities across all of our experiences that I desired to get to know more of the Nigerian youth in the community. So Mrs. Imasuen connected me with more Nigerian families. And as I developed a relationship with them, I was able to get to know them more, and I invited them to partner with me on a research project. They agreed. All 6 youth, 3 boys, 3 girls. The research project was anchored in one overarching question: what happens to Nigerian youth's identities, languages, and literacies when they move to the United States? This question was especially important because of the role that race plays in the United States, and because over the last 5 decades, so many African youth had enrolled in US schools at unparalleled rates. And as I spent more time with the youth, they welcomed me into their families so much that they didn't call me Lakia, they called me by my Nigerian name, ERA. And as I had conversations with their literacy teachers, I learned so many things. But there was one thing in particular that stuck out to me. And that was, unfortunately, all 6 of the youth had experienced some form of linguistic discrimination against their accent in Nigerian English. However, there was one space in each of their schools where they felt welcomed enough to participate that didn't feel like it was laced with linguistic discrimination, and that was through the arts. Dance, creative writing, music, visual arts, these were all the spaces where the youth came alive and were able to express themselves. But this is so much deeper than opening space for African multilingual youth to participate in school spaces, this is about something deeper. It's about the social and emotional well-being. Because when arts are integrated into the schools, it helps to alleviate the isolation associated with immigration. It helps students to form and build new friendships. It helps them to express their identities beyond who the United States says that they are. It's so deep. Now, I know that US schools have a long way to go when it comes to opening space for multilingualism, especially as it relates to Black and African multilingual youth. And the story of the 6 youth that I partner with is not the story of all Nigerian youth. However, there's one way that we can start to open space for African and all youth to participate in school, and that is through the arts. When we do that, we open space for them to showcase who they are socially, emotionally, mentally, creatively, not just in this generation, but especially in the ones beyond. Thank you so much.
I'm a mom, but I'm here to talk about dads. Over the past 20 years, I've had the privilege to connect with a variety of dads in multiple community settings across multiple cities. And one thing I've learned is we have a lot of work to do to make dads and their parenting visible. Why, you may wonder, is it so important to make dads visible? In order to build and sustain a thriving generation, we must acknowledge the work of every caregiver invited to be part of a child's life, and that includes dads. There is a striking lack of representation of dads across research, practice, and policy, especially during early childhood. So for example, very little early childhood parenting research includes fathers. In the policy landscape, 2 of our largest federal programs designed to support parents with young children can include fathers, but you wouldn't know it by their names. WIC, which stands for Women, Infant, and Children, and MICHEV, the Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program. And if you look in popular parenting magazines today, you're still unlikely to see too many images of fathers engaging in interactions with their young children. So how do we make dads more visible? It starts by recognizing that dads are parents too. We know that at birth, most children have a father or a father figure present and ready to be involved. And dads across the economic spectrum participate from the start in things like storytelling, book reading, singing, cuddling, and taking their kids to doctor's visits. In one of our projects, when asked how to make dads visible, one father told us to, quote, "Start with changing the stigma of dads being only responsible for providing financially for his family. Dads are more than that. They are positive male role models and excellent advisors. Dads are just like moms in a sense of having to wear different hats for the family. Dads have a lot to offer." We are trying to hold true to the advice that dad and hundreds of others have given us over the years. As part of that work, I'm a founding member of the Washington Fatherhood Council, a group of over 30 fathers, advocates, agencies, and academics coming together to make dads visible and to try to create a more father-inclusive culture within our communities, our agencies, and our policies. In 2019, we conducted a statewide survey of fathers to learn more about their service experiences. And 2 things we heard from dads that they expressed were challenges were 1, a stigma around fatherhood, and 2, a lack of services for fathers. We are currently conducting an update on that study using a hope-based framework. And we ask fathers things like, how do you best connect with your children? What are your strengths as a father? What are your hopes and dreams for your family? We're also interviewing providers who have shined a light on fathers in their work so that we may learn from their experiences. In a seemingly simple but vital effort to make dads more visible, fathers in Washington have also come together to submit photos for use in a public photo bank, real fathers doing fathering. All of these images you see here are part of that effort. When we make fathers and other caregivers more visible, both the labor and the joy of raising children becomes more equitable and within reach for more people. By making dads more visible, we can transform family systems, dismantle barriers, and create new possibilities for fathers, children, and families. So when you're out in the community, or you're in schools, or you're working in policy spaces, I invite you to join me in making dads visible. Acknowledge when you see dads doing really great things with their kids. Ask if they would feel included in family policies. Make them feel like they belong in spaces like preschools, pediatrics offices, prenatal classes, parenting groups, and early intervention programs. Include them in your research on families. Together, we can reimagine a world where all types of caregivers, including dads, feel represented and supported as parents. Thank you.
Sheikh Clawit, Inknash Winiksha Naku Sapsikwachla, Kushiaputumki Anthony Craig, Washnash Yakamanation Kanek, Kushna Shaikha Talalapa. Good evening. My name is Naku Sapsikwachla, and my English name is Anthony Craig. I'm from the Yakama Nation, and I live at the Tulalip tribes. When I was invited to do this, I tried my best to memorize just the way the other speakers had until my late father, who was a poet, came to me and said, use the written word. I'm going to do this the way I was trained to do it. I'm proud to belong to the communities of Yakama Nation and Tulalip tribes. They continue to make me who I am. I introduce myself in my tribal language so my ancestors may hear me better and fill this room. Make space for them. I hope my late grandmother is joining us too, and I hope she brings my dad. I'm here to share about Indigenous love, intellectual power, and leadership held in the systems of relationality and intergenerationality in our Native communities. On the far left is my grandmother. Around the time she was sent to Indian boarding school. From her home in Atanum on our reservation, she moved to Tacoma, Washington, to St. George's Indian School. Just 30 miles or so from where I stand now, my grandma went to Indian boarding school. She didn't share much about her time at St. George's with us, but a century later, that experience still impacts each one of us. Tonight, I ask you to hold some hard truths with me. Right here in the place where we learn, study, and lead, occurred acts of genocide through formal Western schooling. The government, churches, and other institutions enacted federal policy around boarding schools meant to remove and destroy. Our young people were removed from their families and communities, their lands and waters, their languages and stories. This was also an attempt to remove them from themselves. That was my people's introduction to formal education, and many did not survive. Anyone who wants to acknowledge lands, talk about equity and justice through education, should know and reckon with these hard truths from history. At the same time, we must always acknowledge the futures we must create through these same education systems. So let's also hold the power that has always existed and will always exist in our tribal communities. But back to my Grandma Teresa. The middle photo is a moment of intergenerationality. I used to listen to my grandmother whisper lovingly to my son. My son's now in his 20s. My grandma would speak to him in our language. He was the only person I ever heard her speak our language to. This is learning in action. We have always had systems for teaching, learning, and leadership. And our grandmothers and grandfathers, they protected those and kept them alive and well. My first formal role in schools was as a kindergarten teacher, and I loved my students. I love them today as the 30-year-olds I still run into in Tulalip. My kindergarten classroom was meant to be a space for intergenerational focus on love, learning, and collective healing. However, I let misaligned curriculum, dehumanizing standardized tests, and oppressive behavior programs shape my practice until a Tulalip elder intervened. Kai Kai, Bernie Gobin, offered me one of my most fundamental teachings from our people, Hoyarachach. Hoyarachach, he said. In the language of these Coast Salish territories, he said Hoyarachach. This is a Lushootseed expression that means our way of life. Grandpa asked me, how do you want your classroom to be? You already know what to do. We already have ways of being. Hoyarachach, make it so. To this day, Hoyarachach is the heart of my work and my existence. Always center our life ways. In the far right photo is my grandson and me. He's in the front row. He's now a kindergarten student in the very place where I once taught. My work is now focused on him and his generation. We must shape schooling and learning that maintains this level of joy through systems of relationality and intergenerationality. From the ashes of the boarding school system, we continue turning back to our life ways. Hoyarachach. We have always had the life ways we need. May I raise my grandson to know our ways of life. I pray my ancestors recognize me in what I'm doing. That's the visibility I most seek in my work. I hope anyone hearing these words reckons with the violent histories of this place, but does not stop there. Recognize the perpetual power in our tribal communities. We are building the futures that heal our ancestor spirits by centering Indigenous love, intellectual power, and leadership for our young people and for all coming generations.
Y'all, I have a wild educational journey. I went to 12 different K through 12 schools. And as you can see, I collected my student IDs like they were baseball cards. People often ask, was your family in the military? And I tell them no, but they did cross a militarized border to come here, right? And so people will ask why. Like so many others, right, that do this is to provide their family a better life. I am literally standing in front of you because of my grandfather's journey. Unfortunately, I was not able to meet my grandfather. He passed away before I was born, but I owe him everything for what he's done. I literally embody his dream. However, I want to stand here and make sure that you know that I do not want to romanticize forced migration. Forced migration comes with trauma, and that trauma is passed on to the descendants of those who migrate, right? And so that trauma then, for me, who went to all these different schools, was something that I had to carry with anxiety and nerves, right? And so I can't help but today and think, if my grandfather felt that same way when he went from job to job, season by season, was he feeling that anxiousness? Was he feeling those nerves, speaking a different language, unfamiliar territory? Chicana feminist Gloria Anzaldúa says that people negotiating these liminal spaces are in constant transition. It is a place of where the forbidden and the prohibited live, right? In other words, Anzaldúa calls this place the borderlands. Psychological and physical borders create this world of us and them. It's a colonial mindset that perpetuates this binary way of understanding the world: black, white, right, wrong, win, lose. I can't tell you how many times I felt like a loser when I was going through all these different schools, struggling, trying my best to get to grade, to grade, to grade. But I did what I had to do in the best way that I could do it, and I just put my head down and continued to push through. And in thinking about that journey in the way that I went through, I can't help but also think about the journey of my grandfather and the way that he went through these systems, right? So down the road, I was very fortunate, right, to finally finish my K through 12 schooling experience. I would graduate high school, and I would go to college, and I would become an award-winning journalist. However, I would find myself back into the belly of the beast because teaching is something that's really near and dear to me. And I would go back and get my doctorate. And so the classroom is a very special place. It is a sacred space. It's where we transcend borders. It's where we foster critical consciousness. It's where we see students. It's where we listen to students. It's a place where when people ask me, how many schools did you go to? And I could tell them a deeper reason why. Right? US policies like NAFTA, right, take corporations who go into countries like Mexico, exploit the labor, deplete the resources, causing people to migrate. Currently, hundreds of thousands of people, as we speak, are migrating because of wars, because of climate change, right? The classroom is a very special place where so much can happen and we can do so much. Our students contribute so much to the curriculums that we're in these classrooms. They bring their lived experiences that shape the theories and the concepts that we're talking about. Right? If we center our students, we then center the communities that they're coming from. And if we're doing this, we're then bringing down the walls that are creating this us-them binary. So, thank God, I finally would finish my PhD and no more student IDs. However, when I did graduate, I did attend my graduation, and when I crossed the stage, I did have one ID on me, but it wasn't mine. It was my father's immigration card. And I carried it as a symbolic gesture of his journey, his resistance and resilience, and his determination for a better life. Thank you.
All right. All right. Ain't no security at the door, huh? They let you in. No, no, player. How's everybody doing? A lot of great speeches tonight, right? I really appreciated everybody showing up with their brilliance. And I have the opportunity to end it off, so I hope I don't put it down or too much. This is a picture when I was a child. And when some people look at this picture, some have said that it looks like I'm angry. And that's hard for me to hear, right? It's hard for me to hear because when I look at his face, when I look at my face, I see how sad I was, right? I think about the trauma that I didn't know how to heal. I think about the violence that I was exposed to. I think about the feeling of hopelessness that used to sit on my chest and make it hard for me to breathe. looking at this picture, this face is the face of somebody who believed that nobody cared about him, right? I really believe that nobody loved me at this time, and it had a way, and it does something to your spirit. It has an impact on how you view yourself, and it has an impact on how you view the world and how you show up in the world, right? And so when a child is poured with care and love, right? When that happens and they are receiving messaging of that they're valued and that they matter, that's a special and a powerful thing. Very special and very powerful. It allows for the child to just show up with their brilliance, to build trust, and to be able to freely make mistakes, to learn and to grow. That wasn't my experience as a child, sorry to say. The messaging that I received was that I was a problem to be fixed, a problem to be solved, that the trauma and the pain that I felt on the inside was somehow my problem, because even though I was never given the tools to help manage it, and even though that I was surrounded by folks who not a one would admit to the fact that having feelings and emotions was a weakness, right? The fact that the adults in my life didn't have the tools as well. There was still this expectation that I show up perfectly. There was still this expectation that I show up better. And so the messaging to me was, it gotta be me, right? It can't be them. And so I'm here to say like this. I don't believe in good kids and bad kid dynamics. I think it's harmful. I think it's impactful. I think it's false. I think it helps hold the system in place, right? There's a lot of things that I think that are wrong with these falsified dynamics. You know what I mean? I went through my life of being pictured and being framed as a bad kid. You know what I mean? I was told from every adult in my life, from counselors, from teachers. Some of them didn't have to say it out loud. Some of the times it just came through in their actions and not wanting to call you, or not wanting, and how they treated you in the classroom. You can feel it. I have this idea of that folks who come through a lot of trauma, your sensitivity is on 10, right? So I can read it. You don't have to say it. You don't have to say you don't value me. You don't have to say you think that you're scared of me, you know what I mean? Or whatever your biases might bubble up in you. You don't have to do that. I can read it up off of you, right? And so I'm navigating through the world, reading the world that is reflecting back to me that it doesn't want me, that it doesn't value me. And that was my experience. You know what I'm saying? And so I think it's important to highlight, because at the end of the day, I think that as difficult as it is, hold on a second, sorry. Let me say this. Some people ask me, what could I told him, right? What could I told him to make a difference? And the truth is that what we really need to talk about are the systems that created the circumstances that put him in a position where he needed that type of support, right? I think if we're really being honest, we would talk about the systems. The systems have a way of making the problems individual. And as long as we believe that the problem is the individual and we could fix it through the individual, then we'll never fix the problem, because we have a system that keeps producing harm, and we have a system that keeps producing oppression and disparities. And so at the end of the day, I want to note that. But to answer the question, there's nothing I could have told him, because there's nothing he didn't hear, right? This man had, this child had abandonment issues because folks flew in, and they might care for a minute. They might talk about their care. They might come with something motivational. They might do all these different things, but at the end of the day, they would helicopter right back out. And so I just want to highlight that there's nothing I could have told him. What he needed was somebody to show him something. What he needed was somebody to be there. What he needed was somebody to fill in the gap. And that's what he needed. He needed community. He needed community support. He needed community to wrap their hands around him. He needed community organizations like the Black Rose Collective, right? And I'm talking about organizations that are from the community that they serve, that have the same lived experience of the people that they pour into. So they have this deep understanding of what you're going through. And at the end of the day, they can stay connected to your humanity through whatever the process is to get you back to sustainability. That's what he needed, right? That's what he really needed. But what he didn't need, he didn't need a correctional facility to correct his behavior. He didn't need that. What he didn't need more punitive strategies to make him adjust. He really didn't need to be rehabilitated. He didn't need that either. And what he also didn't need, he didn't need a second chance because he didn't have a first chance. What he needed is what we all need. What he needed was love. That's what he needed. He needed love. If he would have had that, he would have been good. You know what I'm saying? And so at the end of the day, him having love, him getting love, gave him the space to start his healing journey. Him giving love gave him the opportunity to grow into me, right? The reason that I'm here is because love was poured into my life. Not because I'm brilliant, not because of any miraculous anything. It came because love came interjected. It's because empathy came in place. It's because it gave me permission to heal, and it allowed me to show up in the world that didn't show me that. So at the end of the day, I just want to say that these good, bad child dynamics are a part of the problem. I'm going to say if we got to dismantle these dynamics, we got to dismantle these systems that create these dynamics, that keep us all harmed, that keep us all traumatized. And I want to end with this. I want to say that when we're compelled to make an assessment about if somebody is a good kid or a bad kid, when we're compelled to do that, I want to offer that when we making that assessment, instead of making it about them being a good kid or a bad kid, I want us to think about making the assessment on if they're supported or unsupported, if they're loved or if they're unloved, if they're traumatized or if they're healing. Because if you make the assessment and you see that they're unsupported, then I want you to take an initiative and give them the support that they need. If you make that assessment and you see that they're unloved, then what I want you to do is when you leave them, I want them to feel loved. And I want you to do that, right? And at the end of the day, if they're traumatized, what I need for you to do is to give them grace, give them space, and give them the support that they need to dismantle the barriers that are necessary so that that are preventing them from getting on their healing journey. So at the end of the day, we can live in a better world. We can have future generations that thrive. That is a possibility, but what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to collectively invest in what I believe is our most precious resource, and that's our children. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
David, can you come on back out? And speakers, come up here. We gotta give you another round. Come up. Can all the speakers come back out? Come on. David, come on back. Yeah, come on. I hope you feel the love. I hope you feel the lean in, right? And so now we're done. It goes fast. We're going across the street. We're drinking. We're eating. And please, the one thing you can do, come up to them. Tell them about how their stories moved you, okay? Thank you so much for joining us tonight.